welcome to episode 13 of Bible Time with Pastor Zach, and we are continuing today in our journey through Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, which is found in the Gospel of Matthew from chapters 5 through chapter 7. Today we're focusing on chapter 5, verses 13 through 20, and this is kind of the salt and light passage and also Jesus and the law passage before we get into kind of his more prudent teachings. So our first part is this section where Jesus is talking about how his disciples and his followers are salt and light. And so this first passage I'm going to read is 13 through 16 in the Gospel of Matthew. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt loses its saltiness, how will it become salty again? It is good for nothing except to be thrown away and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city on top of a hill can't be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a basket. Instead, they put it on top of a lampstand, and it shines on all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before people, so they can see the good things you do and praise your Father who is in heaven. All right, so the first part, this part about being salted. So in the ancient world, salt was used for a number of different things. It was used for flavoring food. It was used for preserving food. It was also used for cleansing, among other things. And so it had a lot of use, but it had to be salty. And so Jesus has this warning against it losing its saltiness, because as disciples, we're supposed to kind of be salty in how we are distinct from the rest of the world. And so, like if you're a cook and you have used salt before, you know how bland something can be. And if you just add a little salt, it just kicks up the flavor and it just changes it. It's kind of amazing some of the chemical things that salt does, in different ways of cooking and also in preserving food. And so if you remember, in the ancient world, they didn't have electricity. They didn't have freezers and refrigerators like we do, in the modern world. And so salt was used to preserve food, to be able to keep it longer, and it was a very needed thing. But if it lost its saltiness, and the way that it loses its saltiness is if it becomes mixed with something else. And so if it loses some of its purity, it wasn't able to preserve food, it wasn't able to bring flavoring to food, and so and there's no way to get it back. There's no way to make salt salty again. And so that's what Jesus is kind of giving to his disciples and saying that you are salt. You are distinct in this world. You're supposed to flavor this world. You're supposed to be different. But there's this warning that Jesus knows that there are some things that might try to come into our lives that might try to dilute the Christianness in us. Other things that will make us less Christian, or things that will divert our attentions as Christians, and we're not distinct from the world. We are becoming more a part of the world. And so that is what Jesus is kind of warning his disciples against, because he knows that's something they're going to face. It's a temptation that they are going to face. And he says, once salt loses its saltiness, it's good for nothing. And so when we think about that as disciples, as followers of Christ, once we lose our distinctness, and we're no longer pure Christians, and we've let other things come into our world, then we're just, we're not good for anything, and we're gonna get thrown out. And so Jesus is warning against us losing our saltiness as Christians. And then tied to that is this: you are the light of the world. And so we know we have a bit of Christ's light in each of us. And so if you remember, this little light of mine, all of these different things in Christianity where we're talking about the light and God's light, and how we are supposed to, again, not hide our light, not keep it for ourselves, but share it and let it be seen by the world so that other people can see the good things that we do and come to know God through what we do and the way that we live our lives. And so, if you've ever heard like the churches or different people talk about, the personal relationship that they have with Christ, and it becomes so important, and it becomes the main focus, and they forget that there's actually this communal part of not just being a Christian and having this great relationship with God, just one on one, and you and God are right. But Jesus, from the very beginning, didn't call one person and make them a disciple and then call another person and make them a disciple. Jesus made it a communal thing from the very beginning. And so the whole part of being a disciple and being a follower of Christ, it's not an individual thing. Yes, our relationship, our personal relationship with God is important, but it's not the only thing. And I think there's churches and there's theologies out there that stress that more than anything else. And there can be some harm in that. Because if you focus only on yourself and only on your relationship with God, you are missing the point of what Jesus, how Jesus showed us to live and be in community with other disciples. And so I think the main part of both of these things is that that we are supposed to live our lives not just with ourselves in mind, but with how we can be in relationship with other people. And so with salt, we are preserving things. We are bringing out the best in the world through how we interact with it, and how we bring our Christianness or our saltiness into something, and we're bringing the best flavors out of thing while not letting the world overcome us. And we are letting our lights shine and shining it on the dark places of this world and letting other people see the light of God through us. And so that's an important part of what Jesus is teaching us here as he really kind of gets into the meat of the Sermon on the Mount. And then the second part for today is 17 through 20, and where Jesus is addressing his relationship to the law. And so some people thought, the Messianic king would come and start things new and start things over, but Jesus comes in and says right away that he has not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. So this is 17 through 20. Don't even begin to think that I have come to do away with the law and the prophets. I haven't come to do away with them, but to fulfill them. I say to you very seriously that as long as heaven and earth exist, neither the smallest letter nor even the smallest stroke of a pen will be erased from the law until everything becomes a reality. Therefore, whoever ignores one of the least of these commands and teaches others to do the same will be called the lowest in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever keeps these commands and teaches people to do them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. I say to you that unless your righteousness is greater than the righteousness of the legal experts and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So Jesus is talking about how he has not come to abolish the law, but he has come to fulfill it. And in Jesus' time, there were certain Jewish people that kind of ranked the commandments, and so there were groups of ones that were considered more important or greater, and there were ones that were considered concerned lesser. And so that's why Jesus is addressing these greater and these lesser commandments. But the righteousness of the Pharisees, the legal experts, and just the regular everyday Jewish person was concerned about how well you kept the law. And so Jesus isn't coming in to say all of that's gone. He is coming in to say that I am going to fulfill all of that. And one of the more important things with it is that he also doesn't come in and just say everything's fine, everything's peachy, everything's okay. He's not okay with the status quo. And we're going to learn this a lot as we go deeper into the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus addresses a particular piece of the law and then makes a new teaching on it. And more times than not, Jesus is actually raising the bar. So he's just saying, like, you have heard it this way, you have had this law, but really the real Spirit of God is way up here. It's much higher. So it's not down here where you guys have said it. It's much, much higher. And we're going to learn more about that as we go through the Sermon on the Mount, and we go deeper into it. We're going to find all time after time after time where Jesus really raises the bar. and says that this law is really meant to be lived out up here. And so that's the way that Jesus kind of expects us to live, and we are going to learn more about that in the coming weeks as we continue our journey through the Sermon on the Mount. And so that's what we have for this week, my friends. But I hope to see you again. I hope you join us again next week. But until that time, have a blessed day. Goodbye.